Right, good morning, grade 12. Today we are looking at the long run equilibrium and economic profit for the monopoly. We said that in the short run, there are three possibilities. In the short run, like the perfect market, your monopoly is able to make an economic profit, an economic loss, and a normal profit. All right. According to the theory, the most likely scenario is for the monopoly to make an economic profit because of his market power, the fact that he can change the price, and the fact that entry is completely blocked. Okay, so when we go to the long run, the monopoly will continue to earn an economic profit unless there's a change in his cost and his revenue. Remember, we said whether or not the monopoly makes a profit, it depends on his revenue and his costs. Okay, so for example, if there's a decrease in demand for whatever reason, okay, people just have decided they've learned to cope without his product, they don't want to buy his product anymore, the demand is really, really low, that is going to cause his revenue to be very low as well. When there's an increase in costs, okay, for example, the monopoly we said is inefficient because he has no competition. If there's no competition, there is nothing to push him to become more efficient, nothing to push him to decrease his costs, to find a new production method, to find a cheaper source of raw materials. There's no reason why he would want to do that because he's not competing with anybody. Okay, so he will continue to earn an economic profit unless his costs will increase drastically or his revenue drops drastically, or when a new competitor enters the market. All right, but because this is a monopoly, we know that entry is blocked. All right, there's barriers to entry, whether it's natural barriers, whether it's artificial barriers. There's barriers to entry that completely blocks entry into this market. So it is impossible for any new competitor to enter this market unless the barriers to entry is being removed. And if that happens, it will no longer be a monopoly. All right. So entry and exit, it's blocked. Entry into this market is blocked completely by barriers to entry. So no new entries into the market is possible. When we did the perfect market, the thing that takes away the economic profit in the long run is the fact that in the perfect market, there's freedom of entry. So more entrepreneurs will enter the industry, which would make your individual producer's market share to decrease. That cannot happen in a monopoly. All right. So in the monopoly, because entry is blocked, chances are very good that he will make an economic profit also in the long run. All right, because of the fact that there's no competition, he doesn't have to share his market share at all. There's barriers to entry. Okay, now if the monopolist does lose some of its demand, okay, because of consumer tastes changing, consumers decide to live without his product. It might not be an essential product. Consumers learn to live without it. Consumers don't, they stop buying it altogether as a result of changes in their taste and habits, or as a result of changes in the economic climate, okay, where the country goes into a recession, consumers are losing their jobs, they just don't have the money to be able to buy the product of the monopolist. Obviously, that is going to decrease his demand. Or if there's falling incomes. In a recession, automatically, when people lose their job, they also lose their source of income. So if families' income is decreasing, that is automatically going to decrease their demand as well. But even if this happens, a monopolist should still make a normal profit in the long run. In the long run, the monopoly will definitely not make a loss. Right. Remember, the monopoly has market power, complete market power. So if the demand does drop, or if there's for some reason he's losing his economic profit, it goes into a normal profit, it goes into a loss even. He has market power. He can change the situation in the market so that it becomes profitable for him again. Remember, because his demand curve slopes negatively, he can change the price. He can either increase the price, he can decrease the price. He has the power to do that. So if he makes a loss, He will manipulate the price. He will work with his market power and he will change the conditions of the market so that he can benefit from it. Just remember, he has no control over the price at all. Not the price. He has no control over the demand curve. He has control over the price. He has no control over his demand curve. The consumers will still decide at every price level how much they are willing to buy. But he does have complete control over his supply curve. So by changing his supply, by increasing or decreasing his supply, he is able to change the price, increase or decrease the price. Obviously, if he would like to sell more, in a case of falling incomes or a change in economic climate, he would have to sometimes decrease his price in order to increase the quantity demanded so that he can be profitable once again. All right. But the point is he has market power. If he makes a loss, he will change the price to suit him so that he can make an economic profit again. Or he will build a plant size that will create a profit. So he can increase the size of his operations, or he can decrease the size of his operations. Now he can expand or he can shrink. He is the only one he can do that. All right. Otherwise, in the long run, if a monopoly is making a loss, he will leave this industry. Now he will close down. He will be liquidated. He will do whatever. He will withdraw his investment out of this industry and he will go and make an investment elsewhere. A monopolist will not stay in an industry if it is not profitable. All right. So either he's going to manipulate the prices to be profitable once again, or he's simply going to close down the business and leave the industry. Okay, remember, he's not going to shut down. Shut down is a temporary situation. Shut down is something that happens more in the perfect market, because in the perfect market, they don't have control over the price. The purpose of shutdown is to wait for the market to fix the price. In the monopoly is the market. Okay, he can't shut down and wait for the market to fix the price. He is the market. He has to fix the price. So shutdown is unlikely for the monopolist. Not impossible, but unlikely. You will still apply your normal shutdown rule if the monopolist is making an economic loss. Now you will look at his AVC curve, and in theory, if his average revenue is less than the average variable cost, he will shut down, okay, in theory. But in reality, if he makes a loss, he's going to fix the price. Now, he can do that. He's got market power so that he can be profitable again. Or he's going to close down the business. And the industry will cease to exist. And he will go and make an investment elsewhere. He will not tolerate making a loss indefinitely. Okay, so if you are asked to draw the long-run equilibrium position of the monopolist, like in question 1.4 in activity 7.2, automatically you need to know long-run equilibrium position is an economic profit. Okay, the chances of other stuff happening is less likely. The theory says in the long run, your monopolist will make an economic profit. So if you are asked about the long-run equilibrium position of the monopolist, you are going to draw an economic profit. And you need to remember that, okay? If they ask for long-run equilibrium and you draw anything other than economic profit, you are definitely not going to get full marks. You will still get marks for some of your curves, but definitely not for all of them. All right. So just in the interest of revision, economic profit, okay, when we look at the monopolist graph, okay, this is what it is looking like. We are drawing an economic profit. But in the interest of revision, because the monopoly is a difficult graph to draw, I'm going to draw this graph again now with you. And I want you to draw this graph again with me with the heading that says long run equilibrium for the monopoly, just as extra practice. Okay, remember, practice makes perfect. Drawing a graph is a skill, and you become more skilled by practicing it, by practicing it over and over and over. So we are now going to draw this monopoly graph. There is your heading. Now you write today's date. You're going to write your heading, monopoly long run equilibrium. And then we are going to draw this monopoly making an economic profit. I'm going to go through it with you step by step again, okay, especially for those of you that were not at school when I taught the graphs. A lot of you are saying that you're not understanding. I know that you're not understanding because you are not being explained because you're not at school. All right. So I'm going to do this with you one more time. And then everybody, even if you were at school, even if you think you're understanding the graphs, you're going to draw this with me again because it's extra practice. All right. So you write today's date. There's your heading, Monopoly Long Run Equilibrium. You draw your axis. Okay. If you need to pause the video now to get your books ready and to get your station and everything ready, you do so. All right, so when we draw the monopoly in the long run, remember we have to start with our recipe. We follow the same recipe that we used for the perfect market. And step 1 is that we have to draw demand, an average revenue, and marginal revenue. Just remember, in the monopoly, his demand curve has a negative slope. All right, because his demand curve is the market demand curve. All right, and the market demand curve always has a negative slope. All right, so you draw his demand curve, negative slope. You'll see it's relatively inelastic. I'll discuss that more a bit later. Okay, negatively sloping demand curve. And his demand curve also represents his average revenue curve, because in all the market structures, price and average revenue is equal. But part of step 1 still is we also have to add marginal revenue. Okay, we discussed in class, because this person, this monopoly, has to decrease his price in order to increase his output, the marginal revenue will always be less than the price. Okay, so when we add the marginal revenue, remember we said for the first unit, literally the first unit, price and marginal revenue is equal. After that, your marginal revenue is always less than the price. So your marginal revenue curve will always be below your demand curve, because marginal revenue is less than the price. And you can see, remember we did discuss in the revision lesson, that the vertical distance between your demand curve and your marginal revenue curve is getting bigger and bigger, because your marginal revenue, the difference between your price and your marginal revenue, is getting bigger. All right. If you were in class for the marginal revenue explanation, remember I said the lower your price go, your gain is getting smaller and what you are losing is getting bigger. All right, because you are sacrificing some income from consumers that was willing to pay the higher prices, and you're gaining customers that is willing to pay lower prices. Okay, this is what step 1 looks like. We have drawn demand and marginal revenue and average revenue. It is 2 separate graphs. Both of them has a negative slope, and marginal revenue is below your demand curve because your marginal revenue is less than the price. In step 2, we have to add your marginal cost. All right, so when we add the marginal cost, we just do it. All right, we just do it. And then as we draw the graph, remember immediately you are also labeling your graph, because if you don't have a label, you are going to forfeit the marks for this graph. Okay, once we have added the marginal cost, the Nike swishy, we have to find profit maximization point. Okay, now when we find profit maximization point, this in the monopoly is very important, especially if you have not been in class. You need to listen to me very carefully now. The profit maximization rule stays the same. Okay, profits are maximized where marginal cost and marginal revenue is equal. All right, so it's not there. You have to know your profit maximization rule, where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect. On my graph, it's the blue and the orange graph. Where they intersect, we are going to make a little boliki. And then remember, we label it point E, always point E. Okay. Now, very important, once we have found profit maximization point, we need to indicate the price and the quantity where this monopoly will maximize its profits. Remember, this is not the perfect market anymore. In the perfect market, they were price takers. The price was a given. It was already there. All they had to do was decide on a profit maximizing output, a quantity. The monopoly is a price maker. He has to determine the price quantity combination where he will maximize his profits. Right, so once again, to find the price, we find the price on the demand curve. We are absolutely not going to do this. We are not doing this and giving it a value. This is not the price. Here at point E, this is where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect. So this value that we would write here would be the value of marginal cost and marginal revenue. It is not the price. We find the price on the demand curve. So from my profit maximization, I'm going to go dotty key up to my demand curve. There I'm going to make a little boliki on my demand curve. Your demand is a price quantity combination. So when I reach my demand curve, this is going to be the price that the monopolist is going to ask. Okay, and remember, you don't have to use values. You can use P1, you can use P2, you can use whatever you want, as long as you label this on the axis. You give it a value of some sort. Okay, so from equilibrium, from profit maximization point, we are going to go dotty key up. When we touch the demand curve, we make the boliki and we indicate the value. Right, then obviously we have to also find the quantity. Right, the quantity we find where we always find it, on the x-axis. So we go our little dotty keys down to the axis, and when we reach the axis, we are going to give it a value. All right, and that is your profit maximization. That is step 3. Okay, we found our profit maximization point, and we've indicated the value, the price, and the quantity where this monopolist will make his profit maximization, as much profit as possible. The last step is, or the last graph that we have to add, is your average cost. And exactly the same as in the perfect market, your average cost curve, the placement of your average cost curve, will determine if this monopoly is going to make an economic profit or an economic loss. Okay, now we know long run equilibrium. The theory says in the long run, my individual producer must make an economic profit. That is the theory. Okay, the theory says in the long run, a monopoly will make an economic profit. So when we draw an economic profit, we know economic profit means that my average revenue is going to be higher than my average cost. Okay, or your total revenue is bigger than my total cost. But on the graphs, we don't have totals, we have averages. All right, so this means that I'm going to draw my average cost curve. Now remember, the placement of my average cost is going to indicate a profit or a loss. Okay, so when I'm adding my average cost now, I'm going to add it because I want it to be less than the average revenue. I have to add it below my average revenue curve. All right, because a graph that is below means it is less. Okay, so my average cost is going to be below the average revenue when I draw it. But remember, it is focused on profit maximization point. So here where this line of dotty keys, this whole line of dotty keys shows you this is my profit maximization point. This is the quantity, the output where my profits will be maximized. So my average revenue, my average cost, when I add this, it has to be lower. The red graph is my average revenue graph. At profit maximization, the price there, that boliki that I made on my demand curve, this is the value of my average revenue because my demand and my average revenue is the same graph. So this is the value of my average revenue at profit maximization point. So when I'm adding my average cost now, it has to be anywhere below this boliki, below the average revenue at profit maximization point. And remember in class I said we can put it here in between my profit maximization point and my average revenue. It can literally go through my profit maximization point because it's still below average revenue, or it can go way down here below. All right, then obviously the lower down we draw it, the bigger the profit is going to be. Okay, I'm going to draw this one now really low, okay, different from the one that I did in class when we did the short run, so that you can see it can also look like this. Okay, just remember when we draw the average cost, this is the difficult one. You do it in a pencil first. You can always go over the pencil if you want to put a color over it, but if it's in pencil, you can wipe it out if it comes out wrong. Okay, now what you need to remember is a lot of stuff. With average cost, the shape, it has to look like a smiley. It is married to marginal cost, even in a monopoly. So the lowest point of average cost is where it must intersect with marginal cost. And then we have to focus on the placement. It has to be lower than my average revenue. Okay, so when it's in color, it's easier to see. Now, I know my marginal cost is now an orange graph. So I know I'm going to go down, down, down until I touch my orange graph. And then I'm going to start turning up. Then I will get the minimum point correct. Okay, so when we draw it, we're going to go down, down, down until I'm touching my marginal cost curve. Okay, there's lots of curves now, so don't get confused. Down, down, down until I touch my marginal cost. And as soon as I reach this, I'm going to have to turn up. All right, and if you do this, you can see there, my minimum point of average cost is intersecting there by the marginal cost. Now, the lowest point of my average cost, that is where it must intersect with marginal cost. Okay, and if I've labeled that, then I'm finished with my average cost curve. Okay, if you need to pause the video to add your average cost, you do this now, and then you continue playing when you are done. So when we've added the average cost, obviously the last thing that we need to do is we need to indicate the profit area. Now we need to indicate where is this profit. So we know that at my profit maximization point, we know that my average revenue is 20 Rand because we have the average revenue is equal to the price. There, my average revenue and my demand curve is the same. So at profit maximization, if I go up, up, up onto average revenue, my average revenue is 20. But now I also have to find the value of my average cost. So now you're going to go all along this profit maximization point. Now you know all these dotted keys that indicate profit maximization. So there where these dotted keys are intersecting with your average cost curve. Now from profit maximization, you go towards your average cost curve. Now some of you might have drawn the curve there. All right, then you are going to go up, up, up until you reach the average cost curve. If it intersects with your equilibrium, it's fine, no dotted keys, you just find the value. In my case now, I'm going to go down, down, down until I touch my average cost. Now, there where I touch my average cost, I'm going to make my little boliki and then I'm going to find the value. All right, and I'm going to obviously give it a value because now we can see that my average revenue is 20 Rand, my average cost is only 15 Rand. So obviously because my average revenue is higher than my average cost, this person is making an economic profit. Okay, then obviously we need to do the shading. All right, so when you do the shading, this is why I say when you find values, you always go dotted keys. The solid lines are now indicating graphs. Now we're going to go shade over the solid lines because we shade over the graphs. But we can't shade past the dotted keys. The dotted keys are showing us the limit. Okay, so when you are highlighting now, all right, remember I said you use a highlighter. If you don't have a highlighter, then it's fine. Okay, doesn't matter, then you shade, you draw lines or you do whatever. But when you do the shading in a highlighter, then it's fine. We can still see the graphs underneath. Even if you shade in like proper with a pencil or a pen or whatever, just make sure, remember that we can see the shapes of the graphs underneath because they are looking for the shapes to allocate the marks. If your shape is not correct, they are not going to give you the full marks for your graph. Okay, so once your shading is done, Obviously, now you have indicated your economic profit and your graph is finished. All right. Obviously, normally when you draw a graph, you're always going to explain your graph depending on how the question is phrased. Okay. But what you need to learn from today's lesson is obviously that the monopoly in the long run is going to make an economic profit. So if you are asked to indicate the long run equilibrium of monopoly, to draw a graph depicting the long run equilibrium, you're going to draw the monopoly making an economic profit.